Let's dive into the software 3DEqualizer. This is what the 3DEqualizer interface looks like. If you're seeing it for the first time, it might seem strange and unfamiliar. It's definitely different from other programs, and at first glance, it might feel complicated. But over time, you'll realize it's actually logical and convenient. When I opened it for the first time, my reaction was something like, "What is this mess? I don't want to spend my life figuring this out." It felt like it was designed without following the logic of other apps. But after some time, you get used to it, and you realize just how powerful and flexible it really is. If you plan to stay in tracking long term, and I hope you do, you'll most likely fall in love with 3DEqualizer. Just give it some time, it will become your go-to software. In most applications, the main menu is at the top like File, Edit, Help, etc. But in 3DEqualizer, each panel has its own menu and only one of them is the main one. It's located above the timeline panel, near the bottom of the interface. That's the main menu of the program. The timeline panel is the central and non-removable part of the interface. You can't close it, replace it, or move it. Everything else is secondary to it. Key menu items: File, create, open, save, and export projects. Window, open additional panels and windows. Environment, manage interface layouts, like in Photoshop, Nuke, or After Effects. You can switch between different panel setups depending on your current task. Flexible and convenient. Now let's talk about the viewer. Just like in any other software, this is your main preview window. I'll be drawing comparisons to other programs so you can better connect this with tools you already know. Viewer windows exist in After Effects, Nuke, Blender, and others. But in 3DEqualizer, the viewer is a bit different. It has modes, and switching between them completely changes its functionality. The mode is selected from the top left corner of the viewer. Right now, for example, we're in manual tracking mode. In this mode, a specific set of buttons and tools appears in the viewer panel. If you change the mode, the buttons change too, sometimes just a bit, sometimes completely. When we work with grids, we have different functionality. In lineup control, completely different set. In 3D orientation controls, totally different again. These modes don't overlap, they're distinct ways of working, but they all exist within the same viewer. And most of the time, we'll start with manual tracking controls. Each panel has its own menu, but some elements are repeated across them. For example, this is the config menu. Just like in the window menu, we can use config to open additional panels. But unlike window, panels opened through config don't appear in separate windows. Instead, they get docked to a specific part of the interface, depending on where you tell them to attach. In the config menu, you can choose to add either a horizontal or vertical panel. How does that work? For example, if I add a vertical panel like the object browser, it will appear on the right. I can also add a horizontal panel like the timeline editor. From the config menu, new panels are docked to the current panel. Each panel has its own config menu, where you can change the panel's position, add another panel. For example, a vertical panel with attributes. This allows you to build custom layouts quickly and efficiently, panel by panel. We can resize panels and swap their positions using these arrow buttons. You'll find them on every panel that can be closed. The only exceptions are the timeline and viewer panels. They don't have close or arrow buttons, and they can't be closed. All other panels are fully flexible and can be moved, resized, or closed as needed. For example, I can move the object browser to the left side, keep the timeline editor at the top, and leave the attribute editor on the right. This way, you can customize the layout to suit your personal workflow and preferences. I can save the environment if I've built a custom layout for myself, or reset it to default using the environments menu. It might look intimidating for someone using it for the first time, but if we switch to the basic environment, you'll see something that feels much more familiar and comfortable. Most of the time, we'll start our work from the basic environment layout. Let's take a look at the panels that open by default and continue exploring how the program's interface is structured. In the center, we have the viewer. At the bottom, the timeline. On the left, the object browser panel. This type of panel exists in many other programs. It shows you all the elements used in your project. If you look at something like Cinema 4D or Blender, this is exactly the area where you'd find the list of objects you've created. And on the right side, there's the attribute editor, which just like in pretty much every other program lets you edit the properties of the selected object. And just like in most programs that have a viewer, object browser, and attribute editor. In the viewer, we look at what's happening. In the object browser, we select the objects we want to work with. And in the attribute editor, we adjust their properties, settings, and parameters. It works exactly the same way here in 3DEqualizer. We click on an object in the scene, and its properties appear, allowing us to work with them. For example, right now, I see the point group properties. Now, the camera properties. And here, the lens properties. We'll skip the point browser and deviation browser for now, we'll come back to them later. First, let's understand the structure of objects within a project. The scene contains cameras. The camera section includes animated sequences and reference photos, images taken on set. In other words, all the footage and reference material are stored inside the cameras section. Point groups are groups of points that we track. For example, if we're tracking the camera or tracking a specific object or even multiple objects, we create a point groups. And then we have lenses. Here they're referred to as lenses, but in reality this section contains information about both the camera and the lens, including their technical parameters. There are also tabs at the bottom of the attribute editor panel. You can switch between them by clicking objects in the object browser or by switching tabs inside the attribute editor itself. So when we click on an object, we see its properties. Right now we've clicked on a scene object from the camera category. The camera category can contain two types of objects: a sequence, a series of frames, a reference image, a single still image. We can also create multiple objects within the camera section. To do that, just right-click, choose Add New, and select either a sequence or a reference image. When there are multiple objects, we switch between them using a double-click, or more precisely, we set the active object with a double-click. What's the difference? You can view the properties of any object just by clicking it, but you're only actively working with the object that is highlighted in yellow. That's the currently selected object. I can view and edit the properties of the reference frame just by clicking on it. But the active camera I'm currently working with is the one highlighted in yellow. In this case, it's sequence 3. And of course, you can also delete these objects if needed. And when we do that, a pop-up window appears asking what exactly we want to delete. At first, this might seem like overkill, but in reality, it's very helpful. Why? Because you might have multiple objects selected not just in the object browser, but also in the point browser or even in the viewer. So when you press delete, it doesn't matter where your mouse cursor is. 3DEqualizer will always ask you what you want to delete. Something selected in the object browser, something in the point browser, or an object selected in the viewer. In this case, we've selected two cameras. So we choose to delete them and click Delete Selected Objects.